Hello, welcome to episode 134 in this series where I am programming an NES game live on Twitch from scratch. Let's get into it. One quick thing I will announce here in the recording before we go too far into what's going on in the game. I have gotten enough people complaining about zero pages, the zero pages, and take this cushion out. The zero pages and the audio in the zero pages episodes, the early ones where I put background audio and it being distracting. I will republish those videos without the background audio, and I'm not going to take down the original videos because you can't do that and keep the stats for the original ones, even if it's a change that doesn't change the content per se. I'd have to delete them and put the new ones up in their place. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to post them as unlisted and have a link to them in the original episodes so that people can rewatch those without the audio. I just have to publish them back out. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I will go back and do it. As you may have noticed in the more recent episodes of the Zero Pages, I have stopped adding background audio. I don't know. I thought it would be annoying to just have me, or boring to just have me talking with no background audio. But apparently the audio is distracting, despite it being mostly ambient and without words and stuff like that. So keep an eye out for that. If you watch the episodes or tried to watch the episodes and they annoyed you for some reason, sorry about that. Just trying to make them a little bit more interesting. But that being said, let's go into finishing up the changes we need for the map stuff here. So one of the things that we had done was we had changed the code to read our entities from the shooter JSON file and then generate a game entities file. And the problem was that although this is technically fine, it's not fine because in the way that the game was loading the entities from the map file, we never stored off the extra sprite ID, and so we were double reading the same byte for the sprite and the entity, and then that caused us to have them be the same value in our encoding, in our mapping, which worked fine for the purposes of getting things up and running again, but not preferable for the actual game itself. So we're going to fix that here, and then we're going to start trying to figure out how we're going to do enemy patterns and getting into gameplay more, because we spent a lot of time on building out some of the engine stuff here, and I suspect that as we get through the gameplay, we will find more and more things that we need to implement that are independent of the things that we've come up with without even really fully considering the gameplay beyond just a basic shooter or shmup, if you are so inclined to call it. So what that means is that when we write the map file, and I just have to look at where we actually do that. Looks like that's this over. Where is that? Those are the objects in the map. Where are the maps? Where's the map? Where's the map? There it is. So in the code where we write out the map information, Oh no, it's the map object information. I was incorrect. So here we have the sprite ID, but we don't have the entity ID. So we got to look at where we actually do the lookup for the sprite ID. And then once we do that, we can add our code to calculate the entity ID. Is this in the same function? It is. Okay, so this is being... Okay, when we do the export, we are looking up and turning the sprite ID in, that we're using into the spawn sprite ID into the GID. And then we need to do the same thing. We need a spawn entity ID, I guess. So I'm just trying to think of where we want to do that and how we want to do that. So these sprites are this. I guess we should do this. Forget where we stored that. Did we store that in there? We did. So what we want to do is we want to look up the ID of the entity for this. I mean, the simplest way is well, I guess if we're doing that in here, this is our map object count where we're doing this. We'll have another loop in here. I mean, this is super crappy. We could do better lookups than this, but as I've said with this tool, given that it's something that runs, you know, once to export stuff and then the rest of the code is in the actual assembly in the game, as long as this isn't a bottleneck for producing content, you know, we don't want to spend too much time optimizing this. If it becomes a problem later on where generating our maps and working on the game to you know, to change things becomes too slow because of the way that the tool works, then we can always refactor this. You know, it's not like we're working with high-end 3D graphics where rebuilding the meshes for an optimized format is taking hours on end, and you know, as a result of that, it is a process we want to optimize because it helps the artists get stuff into the game build faster or something like that. You know, this is literally, we're just running this through. It takes less than a second to build and copy the files back over to the game directory and build the NES ROM. So we're totally fine with what we're doing here. So I just can't remember. We passed this in as a vector, I believe, or a deck. Sorry, it's a deck reference over here. Project entities. Oops. So all we're doing is we're going to loop through the entities, and we're going to look for the entity name that matches the entity in the object. And then that value is if that matches, then that K value is the entity ID of the item on the map, and then we're going to export that out as an additional byte to the map data or the map object data, and then that will give us our additional byte that we need to read instead of double storing the sprite and then the entity type. So if this is compared equal, then what we say is map objects j. I don't think we have anything here, so we'll say spawn entity ID is equal to k, and then we want to break because we are done with that. If those two sprites are the same, is there a reason we weren't breaking out of that for loop? Or is it just sloppy programming? If it's not visible, then we don't bother looking it up. If they match, then you set the GID of the map object. Oh, because you need to compare every map object against the external sprite. I wonder if this would be better done. No, either way, it's kind of crummy. We can actually, what we'll do is we won't do this here because this is, we're going to end up unnecessarily looking it up a bunch of times. And so while, I mean, we could do it this way, it's kind of pointless. Like I said, I mean, performance-wise, it's not a big deal, but at the same point, it's like no point going out of our way to be sloppy on this. So, all right, so let's just rename this one here. And so I didn't have the right view here, and then I didn't switch to the right view. Well, but that doesn't have the chat, does it? It does have the chat, but why am I all the way up here? That's crazy. I was messing around with this really cool, sorry to do this in the middle of the stream. I was messing around with a really cool thing that Epos Fox recommended. I don't know if you guys follow him or not. He has a really great channel where he reviews a lot of products, but he also talks about streaming and streaming better and stuff like that. And he had found a really cool app for the for your phone to be able to stream from your phone camera to OBS, and it works pretty well. I was messing around with my layout, and I think that's probably what must have happened. All right, so that will map our IDs here. I just want to going to be smart enough to do this for me? Yeah, okay. Yep, okay, cool. And so now that we have both of those set, all we have to do is for the object data that we write out, we want to write out both bytes, not just the one. So that's that. We have our sprite ID and our entity ID. And that's that. And so now let's just double check to make sure that this is working the right way. We'll set a quick breakpoint here. So we've got 7 entities. We have have our two map objects. So what we will do is we will look at the entity. It says little bit, and the project entities are a whole bunch of things. Oh, but the case is not the same. Okay, so let's fix that, because that, I don't mind it being case sensitive. And that was that one, and then we'll do this one as well. Okay. And let's export as, we'll overwrite that file, and then let's run this again and make sure that that has been resolved. Yep, that's that. And then project entities is capital L. Yep, so at some point we should hit that, and value is J, which is 5. That seems correct. So let's remove those breakpoints, and we're done. All right, so now close this. If you guys are fans of the Mad Wizard, the NES homebrew, Derek from Gradual Games is making a Pico 8 demake of that game with Rob Bryan's permission from Slydog Studios, and it's turned out really good. I was messing around with it today, and I can't believe how accurate it is to the NES version. It's really impressive. So he's been working on that for, I guess, a few weeks now. All right. So we copied all that stuff over. Game entities is now the same as that. And then what we need to do here, let's see. So we want to load a, that's the X position, that's the Y position. Type 1 is the type, and then, so this is the, I guess we're going to need T4, which I don't think we have. And this is for calling what? Add map object. Let's see. So we need to make sure we read everything the right way. So spawn at the top of the screen. That's the enemy type. It's based on the way we stored this. We store the X, the Y, if it's visible, the sprite ID, and the entity ID. So load A, that's for the Y. This is the enemy type T1, and then we increment. So if that's the enemy type, how is the next byte the X position? This is the X position for the new flyby if we need it. That doesn't seem right. Compare X level object count done with objects. Load this store. So 1 is the entity type 2 is the X position, 3 is the Y position. So 1 is the type. Oh, because these are the spawn. These are the spawn bytes. But how? I forget how this works. How does this work? Because if we have this thing, so this is the launch, gets the timer. Where do we deal with that? This is what? Object confirmed. Load auxiliary data about the object. Level object data stored into T2. Transfer X to A. Push A. Load X T1. Load the spawning ID, store that into data X, and then increment, and then that's, so it would be here where we want to do level object data Y, entity ID. Right? And then we need to increment Y because then the next thing is the count. I'm just a little bit confused because process map mode, check for objects, spawn at the top of the screen, check next byte. Branch of equal, load A, Y position. Level object data, load A compared to Y position +1. Yeah, okay, so that's checking to see if we're at the horizontal position for the byte, for the object to be loaded. And then we increment the enemy in next because we're looking for the next enemy in the list, because this was way back, but we had made an optimization where you could never load 2 enemies from the list at the same time. They have to have at least a 1 pixel horizontal difference, and the reason for that was that means we only have to ever check 1 object to see if we want to spawn it at any given time. It was a sort of micro optimization, but it's good because if you plan on having a lot of enemies in the game, or a lot of places where enemies can spawn from, you only have to check literally the next one. The downside is, like I said, you can't have 2 enemies at exactly the same Y position. But there are ways around that, because then that spawn position could be for a spawn type that can spawn, 2 enemies on either side of the screen, right? So there's a lot of options there, but it also means we're not looping through all the lists of enemies, or the list of every enemy in the system, or the map, to determine if it's time for it to be spawned. So, okay, so once that's done, it goes to confirm, it goes to the next object, jump, and then it says jump subroutine add map object. But why does it do that already? Add map object, when we only did... See, the problem is I'm confused about how exactly this comes together, because did it read? Didn't read that yet. We have it reading it here. Level object data. After it adds the object, it then stores into T2. Increment Y. And then it loads the auxiliary. Oh, I see. So, So okay. So T1 is the index of the object that was just added. So what we need to do is we don't want to do this anymore. Let me put a note here because I'm sure I'm going to forget. Objects entity type is set outside this, set by the caller. Do we really want to do that? I don't know if we really want to do that. That seems really bogus, because then the fact that I have to put a note here to remind myself that that's something that can happen is kind of stupid. I feel like we're better off doing what I was saying, which was, or originally thinking of doing, which was have a T4 here and just store it, and then go back to add map object, because I almost can guarantee that I'm somehow going to mess this up. So what we can do, do we care about T1? Oh, I see, but we're doing this anyway. Alright. Okay. I mean, should we move all of this data into add map object? It seems like the right thing to do. There's a lot of data here. The problem is, I don't know that it's so much of a problem as it's just part of working with assembly. Okay. Yeah, I'm not... Alright, let's refactor this, because... So what it's doing is, after it calls the subroutine to add the map object, it gets back the index for the map object, and then it's got to load, let's see, whether or not the sprite is visible. So it increments Y, loads if it's visible into A, stores A into T2 to temporarily hold on to it. T1 has the index of the object in the entities list that we just added. So we increment Y to the next byte, which would now be the sprite ID. We take X and transfer it over to A, because we want to make sure that we save the value of X and we push it onto the stack. And the reason we're doing that is because we need the value of X here. We need X here to do the indexing into the entity list like we're doing, because what we're doing is, so we're loading X with the index of the object that we just added with the subroutine at add map object at line 1029, and then we are reading the spawn ID and storing it into the object, and then we're reading the entity ID and spawning it into type. Is that right? Is that the right order? Yeah. And then we're reading the number of spawned objects, which is this count thing, and then we are loading in our frame rate and delay also in all of this code here. There's nothing wrong with the code itself. It just kind of doesn't make sense that we're doing this in code that happens after the thing is added to the map. Like, we just might as well do it as part of the call to add to the map, because I'm sure at some other point we're going to need to add something to the map, and then all of this code is outside of that call, which is going to be a problem. So let's move that code around. So let's go to add map object. It's right there. So here we're storing X into 1 because we're done with it, but what we need to really do is, oh god, that's a lot of code. So see, this is kind of gross, because basically we went through all this trouble of passing the values to the call. Hold on, let me back up for a second. Went to all the trouble of loading the data into these variables T1, T2, T3 to call the subroutine and not have it dependent on the code that came before. But now the problem is that if we want to have all of that code self-contained, we have to read through the data that's in the ROM for the map object, and we could copy it into a buffer in memory. That's kind of a waste. And so what we really should do is have Y just come in and be the position. What we really should do is this. We should say Y, register Y is the beginning of the object in the ROM. And then we don't care about T1, T2, T3 because those things are no longer necessary. The beginning of the object bytes in the ROM, add map object. So what we want to do then is we have the type of the thing itself begins at this Y value here. So we don't want to do this because that's pointless now. This is pointless now. Is there anything that we actually need here before calling? So we do need the Y position, because even though we're not using it to place the thing, we're going to be looking at the Y position on the screen to know if we should spawn the thing. The Y position that's stored is the absolute Y position in the world, is not relative to the screen, which is partially why we don't care about it when we go to place the object on the screen. So what we do need to do though is we need to increment y to the position. All right, so okay. Can we do this? Let's store y into t1 because we do need that value. We do need to increment it as well. So we'll increment it twice like we were doing here, right? Because that'll get us past this and the x, and then we'll be on the y. Increment twice to get to y position to see if it's time to spawn this thing. Right? And then we do our comparisons, and it checks the next byte, all that other stuff that we need to do. And if it's confirmed, then we want to load y from t1, which has the original value of y, which is the beginning of the object information from here. So let's get rid of this stuff now. Well, I don't necessarily want to get rid of it. I just want to remove it from here. Okay, so we confirm that. And then we're going to reset y with the value of t1. So let's go to add map object again, if I can spell it. So now that we're here, register y is the beginning of the object bytes in ROM. What we need to do is the following. We want to, we don't even want to do this yet. I'm jumping a little ahead here. We need to find out if there is an object that's actually available. All right, so we don't use T1 or, yeah. So until we get here, we don't care about any of this stuff because we don't know if it's possible to even add the thing, because we have to check our entity slots to see if there are free positions available. So that's the Y position. Then we want to load A with object, no, map object, what is it called? Oh, level object data, and Y. So that's going to get us our type. We're going to store that into objects, entity, type X, right? We're going to increment Y. Then we're going to load this. So, is this the type or is this the sprite? I guess it's the oh, so there's a secondary problem. Well, let's fix this in a second. There's two problems here, which we'll get to in a second. So store sprite and entity type. Increment Y. So now we have our X position. Right, so that just got stored into objects plus entity X position, X. so that takes care of that. This is unnecessary. That's unnecessary. That's unnecessary. That's unnecessary for now. That still has to happen. Now let's go back to add map object. Right, so now we have this code where it's like, okay, we've added the thing, and we have all this extra data that it doesn't even know about that we're still adding. Which, not my smartest move. Alright, so here's the original code. We had stored our X position. Alright, so now that we've stored the X position and the Y position is next. After that, we don't care about that. We've already stored what that is. Skip the Y position because it's always set above at the top of the screen. That might change at some point. We may be able to, we may want to pass in an argument that says the spawn at the bottom of the screen, but that's irrelevant. We still want to skip the thing right now. So then we want to load so this is whether or not it's visible now. We're storing that into T2. But we don't need to do that because X, we're storing off X here because we were worried about, that should have been my first clue. We're storing off X here to be able to work with the object stuff. And it doesn't seem like we need to actually do that. I'm not sure about why we're doing this. Let's leave that alone for now. We don't need to do this part. X is already pointing to the object because we're using that as our index here. So that's the spawning ID. That's the entity ID. Spawning ID is the sprite ID. And then this is the entity type ID. Which is, this is actually wrong here. It's not supposed to do that. This is the type for the thing that is being spawned, not the entity itself. That's why I said we have a mistake. It's not really a mistake, it's just something, basically we have to add another thing, another export line here, export the entity type for the thing, because the line right above is the sprite ID. So that's what the problem is there. So that's fine. We'll fix that in a second. Then we're loading the level object data for the number of objects to spawn. That's data plus 1. Then Y world position plus 1. Okay, all of this. If the sprite isn't visible, copy the spawn count so that we can keep track of that. Load a T2 if it's not visible. Branch if not equal. So if it's 1, then we jump here. Otherwise, we load the number of spawned objects. That's the count. The frame rate would be the number of spawned objects. Store that there. So that's storing. Okay, load to. Are we? feel like we should be incrementing y here. Keep track of that if we actually need it. Maybe not. Maybe that's okay. Because it looks like we need to store it in a few different places. Data plus 1 is the number of items left to spawn. Oh, yeah, okay. See, that's why you write comments, so that months later or a year later you actually know why you did the thing you did. Okay, increment y, load this, and that's the reset counter for entities that spawn. This should be one, so we immediately spawn an instance in the timer. Right, so this is the frame rate. Count. Let me just double check. So, no, that's the count. And then that's the frame rate here. And then our timer is set to 0. Do we... We're not doing anything with the delay? It's interesting. I'm not sure why that is. Let me see something here. In the meantime, if we go back to the map for a second, you can see that the type is set as spawn point. I think we need to add another property to this as well, or add another custom property for the object entity, or the object sprite, because well, if it's not visible, then it doesn't really matter. But what if it is? What if it's just an enemy? Then none of those properties matter. And yeah, so you still need something. In this case, we can just leave it empty because it's not visible, so it doesn't matter. But we do need to fix that. So, all right. Let me go back to the assembly code. So this is a problem because while that is the right sprite ID, we don't have a way of storing off what the entity type is. We have it here now. Let's go scour our entity structure to see if we have some sort of... We have a word for data. We have the type. We have the sprite. We have the Y world position. Are we using both Y world position? No. That's the reset counter, so we are using that. That's why we're storing it there. I'm also wanting to check something real quick here. Although I don't know if this is going to show me what I want to see, but so that's a subroutine. Oh, right. Oh, is this that old? Oh, no. Okay. Here it is. Okay, so spawn that. It's still... Yeah, that's still pretty old compared to what I'm looking for. Actually, that doesn't... Did it do the right kind of diff? That's weird. I want to see something here. All right. Have to be very careful not to mess up what I just did. All right. So this looks okay. All right. Let's redo all of these changes here. I guess I should have done a commit before I started making these changes to the assembly. Alright, so going back to the entity type here. We only have these two words. Y world position and data. I guess we're not using the velocity for anything. Should just bite the bullet and add another byte. I mean, like I said, we're not using the velocity for anything other than player. That doesn't mean we don't necessarily want to use it for something, but for something like an item that we're creating that's going to launch other entities, it doesn't really matter. I guess that's what we're going to do. Right, because the thing we added was to export the entity ID. We have the sprite ID. Okay. So add map object. So we will, instead of storing it here, we'll store it here. And then in launch, what it needs to do is it needs to create some new entities. Oh, crap. Now I know why I did this. So this is using add map object to actually add the things to the map. Crap, crap, crap. All right. So it was a good idea, except it wasn't. All right, I still want to use YV for that. Sometimes that's just how that goes. All right, so then spawning ID is here. This is all right. So that, unfortunately, is the way we're going to have to do that. I should put a note. Okay. So we've done this. We've got our Y velocity has the thing. So now launch. So we do need a T4 because we do need to be able to pass add map objects. Two different things. This is really the sprite type. So we'll have to fix that too, but that's okay. So this is this, and then what we want to do is we want to load a object entity y velocity, which is really not y velocity, but our entity type. We have our sprite type that got loaded in T1. Okay, so that will work there. Then what we need to do is we need to add a property, and we call it just object sprite. I guess we should rename this then to be this should be. The good thing will be that changing this code, changing the code to handle this will be much easier. All right, so we have object sprite. Because the thing is not visible because it's a spawn point, we're just going to leave object sprite empty anyway. But we got to fix. So this should be called spawn entity spawn sprite. And then actually, if we're going to keep this consistent naming wise, if I would stop bumping the mic, we need to so that's the entity, that's the sprite. I'm going to rename these because this is a little misleading. And then what we need to do is we need to add another one called just entity. Or what am I saying? Not entity. This is just sprite. Because, right, because the type is the entity, and then the sprite is the sprite. All right, so Alright, so we copy that over there. We're going to have to do the same thing where now that we have the type of the thing, that's the entity type. Where I believe we do look that up. Let's see, where does that get saved off here somewhere? No, it doesn't. What if it isn't a spawn point? It's not a spawn point, we just... What do we do? We have our GID of the thing. And the GID is just a GID. And what? We write the export ID, and the export ID is where's final? There it is. The export ID is the sprite. So that's looking at the sprite name. Wait, that's for meta tiles. Where's the for the entities? Is this actually finding all the things that I'm looking for? Map meta tiles. Wait a minute. Map object GIDs 1. I don't think Visual Studio actually found the thing that I was looking for because it got confused maybe. Map meta tiles. Oh, no, that is map meta tiles. Map meta tiles. Because the tile set index starts at 1, not at 0. Oh, because they all get loaded in. So that is really the sprite ID. Right? Is that right? Because then I'm actually kind of confused right now about the way that this works. The sprites are here and they're loaded into the tile sets, which includes the map meta tiles, which is why it's doing this lookup. But is it literally just that straightforward? Let's take a look because I don't remember. Symbol entity is not found. 1651. Shooter.asm. What do you mean it's not found? Oh, because it's type, not okay. I don't actually care if this runs right now. I just want to look at the PPU and my character viewer. Except all my palettes are wrong. And I don't have the right controller hooked up. It's one thing I wish Messin would do a little bit better, was kind of auto-detect controllers. Let me plug that USB in. Alright. But unless you have the exact same controller plugged in, it does not handle that properly. What's going on? Did I mess up the mapping? Oh, I know what I did. I cleared the mapping because I was trying to make this work with the DualSense controller. Because I got one of those early. And I thought it would be cool to see if the DualSense would work with Messin, and it does, but that broke this. Okay. Alright, let's look at the PPU viewer. Character, how is the data organized? So these are the sprites at the beginning. This is the metadata. What is all of this? stuff in the beginning? I don't know, because I can't see it. Looks like it's just background data. Oh, it's the start screen. Okay. There's this the palette's not right. That's why you can't see what those tiles are. So, so let's see. So explode is at the very beginning. Yeah, so it is linear in the sense of that and how the tiles are loaded. I don't remember. I guess it doesn't matter. The point is this is the sprite ID, not the entity ID. So what we would need to do is we would also need to map objects J. So we have this sprite thing, but that's actually not correct. So I was mapping for the wrong thing. What we really want to do is we want to have a thing called entity. And the reason this is happening and the confusion is because realistically tiled is working with the sprites, and so when it says it's a type of something, it's talking about actually, is that just all my nonsense, what I'm talking about here? Can I make this anything? I can make that anything. So why would I do it that way? Okay. Sorry for the confusion. So I can't rename this, but I can make this a little more consistent. So so that would be the entity, and then this would be the sprite, in which case we don't care about that for this. And so when we are loading the type here, no, here, when we're loading the type here, okay, that's why it's ignoring it. Because it's like either it that's weird. If it has a type, how is this getting, oh, it's getting matched by the GID. To the sprite. So maybe I don't need to do this, because if it already knows what sprite it is based on the ID that's coming back from tiled, then we can just look at the type, and if it's a spawn point, we do what it says here. And then what we can say is we want the entity type to be a real entity. I think that's maybe the best option, is that we kind of sync up here on, because I call it a launch here, but it's really weird that it's not consistent. I think that's probably the best bet for us, is that we make that consistent, and then what we do for all of these is we use the type as the entity. So that means we don't actually need this, but we do actually want something called type. We want to save off the type that we load because we have to look it up. So we'll do this, and then we'll say if that and then obviously we got to put matching brace there. If it's not a spawn point, well, actually it doesn't matter if it is or isn't a spawn point, but as long as we have a type for it, we want to string copy that into map object oindex type why are you doing that to me? There we go. That's what I wanted. Max file folder, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I want to copy it into that type thing there. And then when we are exporting the map, what we need to do is we say, okay, so that's the sprite ID, and then we say, well, if it's not visible, if map objects j, stop it, visible. So if it's not visible, we want to just write a 0 sprite, right? Because we don't actually care about the sprite. We don't want to see it. It's not visible. Can't do that. If on the other hand, if it is visible, we have to write something, and then this is the entity. So we have to find the thing that matches this. So similar to what we were doing, what we can do is we can get, let's write a little quick call. Entity ID is equal to get entity from string. We do map objects j dot type dot c string. Yes, I know it doesn't exist. That's okay. So we want to write entity ID 1 byte. And that's going to be our entity. And then where is our code where we are? So literally, we just kind of want to take this thing and make a quick function here called get entity ID from string. I think that's what I called it. and const standard dec standard string project entities reference. It needs to be a reference, please. Okay, so that's the thing by ref, and so that gives us our value here. Let me just return j. This is a UN16. This is no longer what we want to compare against. We want to compare it against, we'll say it's called value, not just string. So we do that, otherwise return 0. Oh, there it was, get entity from string. It should be entity ID from string. Okay, and then this is that's fine. Map objects j. What doesn't it like about this? Oh, we need one more parameter, which is project entities. What's the problem with this? Const char value. Okay, so map objects j type. Oh, type is already a string. Even better. Okay, so that gives us that. So now let's rebuild that. So, I mean, we should get the same thing back every time. It should be the spawn point. There's no member. Yes, that's not what it's called. What did I call it? We don't actually need that anymore because that's already handled. Great. Get out of here. Rebuild. Let's run that. The entity ID is what? Where are the autos? Is 6. If we look at the project entities, damn it. It is the last one. That's good. That makes sense. That's what we want it to be. And it is 6 again. So that's great. That exports the way we want it to. So now we just got to fix the assembly code because the assembly code is looking for something called launch versus spawn point, which is inconsistent, and that will not assemble, but that's okay because I was anticipating that. So all right, great. So let's go back to the assembly. And this should now be called spawn point. So that's that, and then launch, we're going to rename that file to spawn point to fix the inconsistencies of the way that is being done, and that is process spawn point launch. Okay, I think that got all of the launch references. Symbol process spawn point is undefined. Oh. Spawn W point? No. That's not what we wanted. Alright, so that rebuilt, but now the problem will be load map object, no, add map object. So when we add the map object, we are a little bit broken here. We have the type that we're loading. Then we want to load and store that, and then we're going to go to the next one. So we added an extra byte. So we get the sprite, we get the type, we get the exposition. We check to see if the thing needs to be dealt with here. It's kind of crappy that we're doing this every time. I'm not a fan. We'll have to fix that at some point. But assuming that that's good, then we load the thing. Let me put a thing here. We probably don't need to be rereading this every time we process an enemy until it's launched. We should probably save this off into RAM somewhere until we get to the next enemy that we have to load. Seems like a waste of cycles. Okay. Who knows if this worked, if I made a mistake somewhere, but we'll see. Where is the rest of Messin? Hello, Messin. Okay. So far, so good. We're running at super duper speed emulator right now. I probably don't want to be doing that though, because that's gonna mess up my testing potentially. Alright, so we're at normal speed again. We should get enemies spawning here any moment. Or something breaking. Alright, where on the map do they normally appear? They normally appear like right there and then right there. So I'm going to call this a fail right now. Let's see what the deal is. My guess is just some sort of data is not saved in the way it needs to be. Let's take it to the debugger. So add map object. Let's hit a breakpoint there and see what's going on right before we add the thing to the map. So T1 has the value 0, which is fine because we don't care what the sprite is. That has the value 6. That's good. That's X. Alright, so that's all looking good. So let's step into add map object. It's probably something about the fact that the type is 0 for the sprite. Alright, so T2 is 51. Let's take a look. I wonder if I didn't... I'm thinking I probably didn't update something that I thought I did. T1 is the sprite, and then T4 is the type. That's okay. I mean, that all looks legitimately right. Let's go to where is objects at 500? So, and then X is at B. So at 511 we stored off 6. If we look at the entities, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh no, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, actually, it's this guy here. Did we do that correctly? So that's the X position, the Y position, the Y world position, which is 2 bytes, the X velocity, the Y velocity, the type. Okay, that looks correct to me. Let's go to the debugger again. So we store the index there. We pop back out. Oh, are we... No, okay, we're not overwriting the type here, right? We're not. So we go through all this stuff. We load A with a value of 0. That is interesting. Why? Oh, because I removed that loop, didn't I? I removed the loop and then I never made the call. Let's see. I removed the loop from up here, right? And then I never made the call to actually get the ID properly. So it's always 0. Is that what happened? I see the code for the spawn entity ID over there. Let's see. Or maybe I didn't, and maybe it's just something is broken. Where are we processing that? That was the last change. So export map. So we are doing it here. We don't need to be calling it in the way that we're doing anymore. We can say project entities, no, map objects j dot spawn entity ID. Wait, j? That's a problem. So that could be it. There's a bug in the index I'm using. So spawn entity ID is equal to get spawn get entity ID from string, and that would be map objects I dot spawn entity. All right, so we have that, so we don't need that anymore. We just keep calling that there. So let's re-export the data, see if that fixes our problem. Oh. Yep. You gonna run? Or did you run and everything was good? Okay. So let's go back to the exported data and grab this again and overwrite it. Good. And then load that in Messen again. Not save states. Run the code. All right. So we have our breakpoint still set. let's see if it breaks when we get to the point where it's supposed to spawn the enemy. It should, and then what we'll probably see is that it's not spawning the right thing because the ID, or that was the problem before, the ID was 0 for the thing it was trying to spawn, so that was why it was not actually creating anything on the map. It's still 0. Both of those are 0. Why is that? Let me back up for a second. No, can we rewind, please? It's because of my breakpoint. Hold on a second. I gotta rewind enough that the breakpoints don't trigger while we're rewinding, and far enough that they will trigger eventually. Again, there. Okay, so what I want to see is, so it's loading that it's not visible. What is level object data at? It's at 9D47. Is that, wait, is that where it is? Yeah, 9D47. 9D47, which is the ROM. So 9D47, that is saying the sprite is 0, the entity ID is 6. That's our X, that's our Y. Right, that's 2 bytes. Visible is 0. Spawn sprite ID. Oh, they are actually 0. Well, why is that? Oh, because I didn't re-export the map like a dummy. That's why. I changed it in the map, but I never re-exported it. Crap. Well, that would do it. Export as map1.json. Well, that certainly explains why it didn't have the right data anymore. I assume these are correct now. No? Type is that, and then these are set right, right? Let me stop. Let's try this again. Spawn entity, a little bit, and then spawn sprite is also a little bit. So that is correct now. So why are these both 0? Spawn sprite ID. Where do those get calculated? So why didn't that work? GID is 8. So that set that one. Map objects. Oh, is it because I didn't give it a name? So it has a type, but not... Well, that shouldn't matter because the spawn... Oh, why are those both empty? Oh, because I only changed it for this one. That's why. I forgot that these are not shared properties. So the renaming of it there on that one object did not obviously impact the other, which is a shame, but that's simple enough to fix. Okay, so let's export this and save, and yes, and then we will rerun this and should be in good shape now. That's why it wasn't finding anything for those, because those properties weren't being set properly. So all right, so that's been exported. Let's export the take the exported code and replace this stuff and make it and run it. Hear the dog going up and down the steps, making unnecessary noise. He's probably sad because nobody's around to give him biscuits. He's probably going to come right up to the door and start whining. But we're going to wrap here soon in a moment. I expect that this shall function now as we expected it to. All right, so after we do that call, hey, it's got an ID. So the fact that it has an ID means that now it should start spawning. So it's spawned. That's interesting. So it spawned invisible enemies. That's a new one. Let's go back and look at what those values were, because I was all ready to declare victory, and it turns out that we weren't quite there yet. So let's go back to our code. Add map object. So that's this, and then let's see what it does when it's creating it. So after we do that, we had an 8 for the sprite ID. So if we go to our sprite types, that's little bit, that's good, that's what we wanted it to be. And then the entity type is 5. And if we look at that, that is not okay. That is it's off by 1. Is it just as simple as we have a dumb off by 1 error? I guess so. I think that makes some sense because we hardcode no entity in there, so I guess we should properly return +1 also. Darn off by 1 errors, they get you every time. Okay, so that's good. We're getting closer here because that was a relatively simple, albeit dumb, mistake. Alright, let's go back and make this again. Go back to the emulator. Let's, the debugger is paused. Let's resume the debugger. And that, and why aren't you increasing emulation speed? Why? It's like the emulator has stopped responding. All right, let's close the program. Okay, so there we go. We're at ludicrous speed. Okay, that was the correct behavior. Let's just make sure there's nothing weird about those enemies. I want to be in place here to both shoot one and also crash with one. They look good. They look like they're supposed to. Yeah, so that's good. So that's that wave, and then there should be yet another one coming up. In a moment. Let's just wait for that. Come on. Don't be shy. That should have happened already. What happened? So they didn't spawn. Spawn entity, spawn sprite. Did I spell that the same? They're the right capitalization. They're both spawn points. And just make sure. Resave that. Right. So that's that. They're just the two map objects. We re-export those guys. I just want to make sure that it wasn't something like I didn't save it properly like I thought I did. Instead of wasting time trying to figure out something that's not a real problem, but we'll see. And we'll warp speed through having the enemies show up here. I don't care. It seems like once they spawn, they're fine. What I did want to try just before we wrap for tonight was... Crap, why is that not working? Let's go back here for a second. Might be faster to just zoom through this again. What I wanted to do was I wanted to confirm that we're actually... I want to see what the data it looks like. We'll see if we hit those breakpoints again. So let's continue on. Oh, the emulator is paused and the game is paused. All right. The unfortunate thing about having the debugger open is that it is a little bit, makes the game a little bit slower. Why did we not hit that breakpoint? that is a little bit crazy. It's possible that the code change somehow... Well, it shouldn't have. Add map object. That's there. That's there. Let's actually, let's get rid of all breakpoints right now. And let's create that, and then let's continue. Make sure we hit the breakpoint. We're not hitting the breakpoint. Why are we not hitting the breakpoint? Where did my map object go? Did we hit it? No, because that was because of the pause. Let's do it this way. It's taking too long to rewind at that speed. Should hit the first breakpoint. Yeah, so there's that. That one's good. Nothing. What's going on? Why are we only getting one object? Where is that? So this is where we're exporting that. So if it's not visible, we write 0, and then we write all of this stuff. Spawn 8, 6, okay, that's good. Count, okay. And then this is also not visible, so we do the same stuff here. Oh, is it because I am dumb? Not that I'm dumb. I know what the problem is. When we are going through the level data, we have to increment. We have to do the math to determine where. So that the enemy index tells us where to start looking in the data. We've changed the size of the structure that's involved, and that's going to break stuff. So we have 1 byte. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bytes. So we need to multiply by 10. So right now we're just multiplying by 2, 4, 8 by 8. If we do another shift, we multiply by 16, but that's too many. So take the enemy index. Sorry, I gotta think about this for a second. We're multiplying it by 8 there. we need to multiply it by 10, which is the equivalent of how do you do this? I always forget. If we I know how to multiply by 10, obviously, but when we're doing it with shifts, you want to take the value of the index, multiply it by 8, and then what, add it to itself 2 more times. Is it the index value 2 more times? Like if we were doing a simple one of like 2 times 3, we could shift it once to get 4, and then add, yeah, and then you add itself however many more times you need to complete essentially the why can't I speak? To complete the multiplication. So we need to load A. With that, we do our shift of 8, and then we do clear carry, add C of we have an X, but we can't add it to that. Store X into T1, add C T1. We need to do that twice because we will shift by 8, so that'll be the equivalent of multiplying by 8, and then we need to add whatever the index value is 2 more times. So if the value is 1, we'll get 8, and then we'll add 2 essentially, which will give us 10 as the offset, which is right. If it's 2, then we would get 16, and then we would add 2 twice, which would give us 20. Yeah, that's right. So that's what I thought we needed to do. I don't know why my brain... I used to be able to do this without even thinking twice about it, but I'll chalk it up to age. Or lack of use. I don't know which one it is. Probably age. Alright, I think that will fix the problem. I don't need the debugger. So the next one should appear now. The problem was we were indexing into the list wrong. So the next set never got loaded because it was... Oh, really? Did it not load the ROM? That should have done it. So we should get it here. There it is. Okay, and it had the right counts and everything, so... Because we had added, I think that's 5 that it spawns. Here, let me just restart, and once we get to that one, we'll actually slow down to normal speed and count. It's a little too slow. Okay. Oh, no, go back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's 5. And one thing, I don't know if you guys noticed while we were working on this, but the spawn point used to actually have a sprite there that it showed. And now that's gone. So that's all working. Great. So that's it for tonight. We'll resume on Monday, you know, work and all allowing. But thank you for watching. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Clairvis. You can find me on Video Game Sage as Zelius. You can email me at zelius@gmail.com. If you have questions, feel free to comment on the recording that's posted on YouTube with any questions. I'm happy to answer as much as I can. Feel free to check out the links to the Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee for any of the stuff that I'm doing on the zero-page episodes. I know people have found those very useful. And as always, I will catch you on the next stream. That'll be Monday. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. And I will talk to you later.